The training hall of the Alien Military Academy was a place that usually buzzed with noise and arrogance. A place where young warriors laughed too loudly, where the sound of boots striking the metal floor echoed like a war drum, where confidence filled the air like smoke, but not today. Today, the room was quiet, heavy, still. Dozens of alien cadets sat in perfect rows, their scaled faces turned toward the front, where an old instructor stood with his back straight, hands behind him, the scars on his blue skin catching the light. He had trained hundreds of soldiers, many who'd gone on to crush enemies on distant planets. He had seen every kind of species walk through these doors. But none had changed the air like the human standing in the back of the room. The human wasn't big, wasn't wearing anything that screamed power, just a plain dark uniform. But the silence around him was different. Every other cadet had whispered when they first entered. But he hadn't. He'd just watched. Calm. Still. His eyes moved across the hall like he was measuring everything. The instructor didn't like it. He had seen fear, he had seen overconfidence. But this stillness, was something else entirely. He turned his head slowly, his eyes narrowing as they found the human. The instructor walked to the center of the platform, boots thudding softly against the floor. His voice low but sharp as a blade. "Cadets," he said, "today, we speak of predators." A soft rustle moved through the class. Everyone knew this lesson. It was an old one. The instructor liked this one the most because he had used it to humiliate countless recruits over the years. There is only one rule when facing a predator, he continued, cripple it before it kills you. Then he turned, pointing one long claw toward the human at the back of the hall, his grin spreading slow and wide. "You," the instructor said. His voice cut through the air like a knife. Every alien cadet turned their head. Some smirked, already waiting for the human to fumble his words. Others stared with mild curiosity. This was the game the instructor liked to play. "List 3 ways to cripple a predator," he said. His tone was casual, almost lazy, like he already knew what would happen. No one ever answered this question cleanly on their first try. Most cadets stuttered, offered weak answers, and he tore them apart with cruel laughter. The human didn't move. For a moment, it looked like he hadn't even heard the question. Then slowly, he leaned forward in his seat, resting his forearms on the table in front of him. His eyes lifted. They weren't nervous. They weren't uncertain. They were calculating. A chill moved across the room. "List 3 ways to cripple a predator," the instructor repeated, sharper this time. The human tilted his head slightly, almost like he was considering the question from a different angle than everyone else. His lips parted, and he spoke, his voice calm, level, but carrying through the entire hall, temporarily or forever. The room froze. Every alien cadet stiffened. The instructor blinked, caught off guard for the first time in years. No one had ever responded like that. No one had ever made it sound like a choice between breaking a predator for a moment or ending it completely. The silence was so thick it pressed against the walls. Even the hum of the training lights seemed to fade. The instructor stared at the human, and for a split second, he saw something in those calm eyes that didn't belong to a cadet. It belonged to a hunter. The human didn't fill the silence. He didn't look around for approval. He just stared at the instructor, patient and still, like someone who had been in real fights and didn't need to prove anything to anyone. Some of the alien cadets shifted in their seats, suddenly uncomfortable. One of them, a tall, scaled creature with wide amber eyes, whispered under his breath, "Did he just give options?" The instructor forced a laugh, though it didn't sound as smooth as usual. "Bold words from someone who hasn't even faced a predator in this arena," he said, trying to regain control of the moment. But deep down, something in his chest twisted. He had seen eyes like that before. Not often, but enough to know they didn't belong to someone soft. The instructor stepped closer, his boots ringing out across the silent room. "Explain," he ordered, his grin fading into a thin line. The human didn't rush. He straightened slowly, the movement controlled, almost too precise, like a soldier who had spent years doing nothing but surviving. He didn't speak with loud words. He spoke like he was simply stating facts. "Every predator has 2 weaknesses," he said softly, "what it trusts and what it fears. And if you're patient enough, you can break either. It wasn't the answer the instructor expected. It wasn't an answer that followed the script. This wasn't someone reciting training manuals. This was someone talking from something real. The instructor narrowed his eyes. You think you can cripple any predator? The human's gaze didn't waver. I already have. The air tightened. A low ripple of whispers broke out among the alien cadets. Some laughed nervously, others leaned forward. One of them whispered, "He's lying." Another whispered, "What kind of human talks like that?" The instructor raised a hand and silenced them with a single gesture. Then show us, the instructor said slowly, almost like a challenge, though a small part of him already regretted it. Show us how you would do it. He pressed a control panel on the wall. The floor of the training hall opened with a deep mechanical groan, and a holographic emitter rose from the ground, humming with energy. A projection formed in the center of the room, flickering to life in cold blue light. A massive alien predator appeared, muscles thick as steel cables, claws like blades, eyes glowing with hunger. Even though it was only a simulation, the sheer presence of the creature made several cadets step back. This beast was infamous. The instructor loved using it because it made even the most confident cadet stutter. It was fast, it was smart, and it was known across the galaxy for ripping entire squads apart in seconds. The human didn't step back. His boots clicked softly on the floor as he walked forward. No hesitation. No bravado. Just cold, controlled movement. Every step echoed in the silence of the hall. The alien cadets watched with wide eyes. Some leaned forward without realizing it. The instructor folded his arms across his chest, but his jaw was tight now, his grin gone. The human stopped a few feet away from the holographic beast and tilted his head slightly, studying it. He didn't flinch when it roared. He didn't move when it lunged forward, its claws passing harmlessly through the air as the hologram flickered. He simply watched, as if it was nothing more than a puzzle to solve. Finally, he spoke. 3 ways? He asked again quietly, more to himself than anyone else. That's easy. Something in his voice made the room colder. One of the alien cadets whispered shakily, "He's not even scared." Another muttered, "He's insane." The instructor said nothing. He wanted to see where this went. The human took another slow step forward. "The first way," he said softly, "you don't fight its strength. You break what it relies on." He tapped the projection, pointing to the beast's front leg joints. "Speed. This thing runs, jumps, tears. Take that away, and it becomes loud, slow, desperate." A few alien cadets blinked. That wasn't how they were trained to think. The human circled the beast like a shadow. "The second way," he said, "you don't need to be bigger. You go where it isn't looking." His finger pointed to the back of its neck, where the sensory cluster was exposed for a fraction of a second. Every predator has a blind spot. They just don't think you're smart enough to find it. And then he stopped right in front of the creature, his eyes locked with its glowing holographic stare. "The last way," he said slowly, his voice like ice, "is the one most people don't use. You don't just break the body. You break the will. You show it that it can bleed. And once it knows it can bleed, it stops being a predator. It starts being prey." The last word echoed through the hall like a blade sliding out of a sheath. The alien cadets were silent. Some swallowed hard. The instructor didn't smile this time. His throat was dry. He had expected a game, a moment to humiliate the human. Instead, he'd felt something shift in the air. The hologram flickered and faded, but the image of the human standing in front of that monstrous creature didn't. No one laughed. No one dared speak. The instructor met the human's calm stare and, for the first time in many years, felt like he was the one being studied. And somewhere deep in the minds of every alien cadet sitting in that room, a single thought formed, quiet and cold. This was not a creature to mock. This was something else entirely. Something dangerous. Something that made even predators hesitate. The lesson wasn't over, but the room would never forget that moment. The human hadn't just answered the question. He had reminded them why humans were feared long before they ever joined the stars. The alien cadets couldn't stop whispering after the humans spoke those cold words, their voices sharp and low, bouncing around the walls of the training hall like tiny sparks before a fire. The question had been asked hundreds of times before and everyone had always answered the same way. Slow, nervous, predictable. But this human had broken that pattern with one line. One simple, chilling question that none of them expected, temporarily or forever. And in that single moment the quiet classroom had turned into something heavier, like the air itself had gained weight. They looked at him not with the casual arrogance they had shown when they first walked in but with something different, something closer to wariness, like animals watching another animal they couldn't read. The instructor stood frozen at the center of the room, his jaw tight, trying not to show that the human's words had unsettled him. But deep inside a thin crack had formed in his confidence. He had faced killers, soldiers, predators across worlds, but he wasn't used to recruits talking like this. He forced a grin, one that didn't reach his eyes, his voice rough as he barked, "Cadets, control your tongues." And the whispers died out instantly. But their eyes stayed locked on the human sitting at the back, his posture straight, his face calm, not defensive, not proud, just quiet, as if this entire moment belonged to him. The instructor's boots hit the floor with hard metallic thuds as he approached, his scars gleaming under the overhead lights, his voice dropping lower as he said, "You think you're clever, human? You think words make predators bleed?" But even as he spoke, he could feel it. The eyes of the room were no longer on him. They were on the human, the weight of the moment already shifting. The human tilted his head slightly, like a man who had heard questions like this 1,000 times before, and his response came quiet, measured, "I don't think. I know." A ripple went through the room. The instructor felt the tension climb up his spine. He needed to regain control. He turned away sharply and began to pace in front of the class. "Humans," he said loudly, as if trying to rebuild his authority with sound. "A young species, too emotional, too reckless. But today you will learn why this academy trains warriors and not storytellers." The alien cadets nodded, some smirked again, clinging to the familiar arrogance, but they didn't laugh like before. Not after the human's voice had cut through the air like that. The instructor pressed a button on the wall and the training platform shifted. Lights dimming around the edges, holographic grids coming alive on the floor. The academy's signature predator lesson was beginning. "In this room," the instructor barked, "we face what hunts us, not what stands in front of us." Then he spun sharply, pointing straight at the human. "You want to talk like a hunter? Show us how a human cripples a beast." The alien cadets turned their heads toward the human. Some of them leaned forward with narrowed eyes, waiting for him to stumble, to break the image he had just created with his quiet confidence. A few of them whispered again, their words sharp like knives, "He'll mess up, he's just bluffing, humans panic fast." But the human didn't even look their way. He slowly rose from his seat, his boots making soft, steady sounds against the cold floor, no rush, no hesitation, like a man who already knew exactly how this moment would go. The holographic projector at the center of the room powered up with a deep hum, the light spilling across the walls in waves of blue. Then, with a growl that didn't belong to anything gentle, the beast appeared. It wasn't real, but the way it filled the room made it feel like it was. 10 feet tall, plated skin, claws sharp enough to tear armor, eyes like burning coals. The alien cadets instinctively tensed. Even the instructor's grin returned, because this was his arena, his lesson, the moment where recruits folded. But the human walked toward the holographic predator with the slow, even gait of someone approaching an old friend. He didn't flinch. He didn't posture. He just stared at it, his eyes narrowing slightly, like he was measuring its heartbeat, even though it didn't have one. A strange hush fell over the room again, like something was crawling under everyone's skin. The human stopped a few feet from the creature. The predator let out a deafening roar, shaking the training chamber walls, and several cadets stepped back. But the human didn't move. The instructor folded his arms, trying to hold onto his role, but even he noticed it. The human wasn't looking at the creature the way recruits usually did. He wasn't looking at the claws or the fangs or the size. He was looking at how it moved, how it breathed, how its weight shifted. Like someone who had done this before. One alien cadet whispered under his breath, "Why isn't he scared?" Another responded in a shaky voice, "Because he's either insane or dangerous." The instructor snapped at them, "Silence." The human slowly tilted his head and spoke, his voice low but so clear it sliced through the silence. "You've been teaching them the wrong lesson," he said. The instructor froze mid-step, his jaw tightening. "You're teaching them to fight monsters as if monsters don't bleed." The words landed like a punch in the gut. The alien cadets exchanged uneasy looks. The instructor stepped forward, his voice rough with authority. "You think you know better than 100 years of combat training." The human's gaze flicked to him for just a second, cold and unbothered, then returned to the predator. "I don't think. I know." Something in the way he said it made the instructor's stomach turn. The alien cadet's attention had completely shifted now. This wasn't like any lesson they'd ever seen. The human wasn't here to impress anyone. He wasn't here to prove anything. He was here to remind them of something they didn't understand yet. And as the holographic predator growled and bared its teeth, the human slowly raised his hand, not to defend, not to strike, but to point, calmly, at the creature's leg joints, then its throat, then its eyes. His voice stayed low, steady, like someone describing how to dismantle a machine. "You take its legs. You take its breath. You take its sight. It's not a predator anymore." The instructor opened his mouth to speak, but nothing came out. For the first time in his long teaching career, the control of the lesson had been ripped out of his hands by someone who hadn't raised their voice once. The alien cadets stared at the human with wide, silent eyes. Even the holographic monster, towering and roaring, suddenly felt smaller against the quiet precision of the man standing before it. And in that moment, everyone in that room, even the instructor, understood something they had never wanted to believe. Humans were not prey. They were hunters pretending to be prey. And this human wasn't learning. He was remembering. The holographic beast towered over the training hall, its massive claws digging into the smooth floor, the faint rumble of its growl shaking the walls, and every alien cadet could feel it in their bones, that sharp, animal instinct to step back, to make space for something built to kill. Its glowing eyes swept over the room like burning coals searching for weakness. Its tail whipped the air in slow, dangerous arcs, each movement too smooth, too precise to belong to anything tame. This was a predator that had ended wars, a creature designed by nature to dominate everything smaller, weaker, slower. But the human didn't step back, didn't blink, didn't breathe like the others. He simply stood there in front of it, shoulders relaxed, eyes calm, like a man who had stared down worse things than teeth and claws. The instructor's grin returned, but it was thinner now, forced. He crossed his arms and tilted his head, his voice dripping with the kind of cold confidence that came from years of controlling this lesson. "Let's see if the human bleeds like the rest," he said, and some of the cadets laughed nervously, but their laughter didn't feel right, not this time, because the human wasn't acting like anyone they'd ever seen. He wasn't trembling, he wasn't excited, he wasn't performing, he was studying, watching, measuring. It was the kind of look predators gave before they struck, and it made some of the alien cadets shift uncomfortably in their seats. The beast moved, a sudden lunge forward, its claws slashing through the air where the human's chest should have been, and several cadets gasped, one even shouted, but the human was already to the side, not in a panic, not stumbling, just stepping smoothly out of its reach like he'd known where it would strike before it even moved. His boots made no sound. His hands didn't rise in defense. His breathing never changed. The beast's claws left long scars in the floor, but the human stood untouched, looking at the holographic creature the way a surgeon looks at a broken bone. The instructor's grin faltered slightly. This wasn't the reaction he was used to. Normally, cadets screamed, froze, or fired too fast, giving him easy victories. But this man didn't flinch. He tilted his head a fraction, just enough to track the way the beast's back leg shifted when it lunged. That single movement told him everything. The alien cadets leaned forward without realizing it, their hearts beating faster as if they themselves were in the predator's sights. One of them whispered under his breath, his not reacting, his calculating. Another cadet shot him a sharp look and whispered back, his hunting. The beast lunged again, faster this time, roaring with such force that the air itself seemed to vibrate. Its claws sliced down in a brutal arc, a killing blow that had crushed hundreds of trainees before. But again, the human moved, not by running, not by dodging wildly, but with a controlled step inward, a shift that brought him close to its blind angle. He didn't even look scared. His hand moved slowly, pointing to the thick muscle at the back of its front leg. "Here," he said softly, his voice calm, cutting through the tension like a blade. "One strike, one tendon. It never runs again." The entire room went silent. Even the beast's roar seemed to hit a wall and echo back, smaller. The instructor stared at him, his lips pressed into a thin line. This wasn't supposed to happen. This lesson was meant to break the new recruits, to show them fear, to remind them what they were up against. But the human had walked right into the jaws of it and started explaining how to break it apart like it was nothing. The holographic predator spun, swiping at him from behind, but the human had already shifted, his boots sliding across the smooth floor like water moving around a rock. He raised his hand again, pointing to the soft glowing skin just beneath its jawline. "Second strike," he said, still quiet, still steady. "They breathe through here. They think no one's fast enough to touch it. They're wrong." The alien cadets stared at the point he indicated, some of them subconsciously reaching for their own throats. A few of them began to understand. This wasn't a story. This wasn't bravado. This was someone who had done this before. Someone who had seen real monsters bleed. The beast growled louder, its massive head lowering, trying to intimidate him, its tail lashing harder, shaking the floor beneath their feet. But the human didn't back down. He took a step forward. Not fast. Not aggressive. Just close enough that the beast's teeth were inches from his face. His eyes didn't waver. For a heartbeat, it felt like time itself slowed. The alien cadets forgot to breathe. The instructor forgot to smirk. Then the human whispered, so soft it almost got lost under the creature's breath. "Third strike." The mind. Fear works both ways. He moved his hand in front of the beast's eyes. It lunged again, but the human didn't flinch, didn't move, and somehow that made the entire room feel colder. The holographic creature roared, its massive claws snapping through empty air as he stepped to the side once more. This time, he didn't point to any part of its body. He just stared at it, unblinking, a calm, steady gaze that didn't belong to prey. And in that silence, the predator seemed smaller. The alien cadets shifted uneasily, their scales prickling, their instincts screaming that something was wrong. One of them whispered, "Why does it feel like the predator's the one trapped?" Another answered, "Because it is." The instructor's knuckles turned white where they clenched behind his back. He had seen soldiers fight predators before. He had seen bravery, fear, panic. But he had never seen anyone turn the lesson around like this. Not with calm, not with silence. This wasn't a student trying to prove himself. This was a man who already knew the answers. The human slowly lowered his hand and turned away from the beast. He didn't need to finish the simulation. He had already won without striking once. He walked back toward the center of the room, his steps measured, as the beast behind him snarled and thrashed at nothing. A holographic predator made to terrify entire platoons, and he had made it look like a caged animal. The alien cadets didn't cheer, didn't laugh, didn't move. They just stared at him, some with wide eyes, some with their throats tight, all of them with the same realization crawling in the back of their heads. The predator had been brought in to remind them of their fear. Instead, the human had reminded them what fear looked like when it was turned around. And as he walked past them, his gaze brushed over the instructor. Just a glance. Nothing more. But the instructor felt it deep in his bones. This wasn't a man pretending to be dangerous. This was a man who had been dangerous for a very long time. And now everyone in that room knew it. The training hall was no longer just a classroom. It had turned into something heavier, something that hummed in the walls like a storm waiting to break. The air thick with the scent of tension, every alien cadet sitting frozen in their seats, their earlier arrogance stripped away like skin in fire, their eyes fixed on the human standing before the holographic predator like he had been born for this moment, Like everything about him belonged in front of monsters. The predator paced in a slow, dangerous circle, its claws dragging across the smooth floor, its growl rumbling deep and low, but the human didn't move back even half a step. He stood like a wall that couldn't be moved, his shadow cast long across the room under the bright training lights. And it wasn't the predator that controlled the room anymore, it was him. The instructor's throat was dry. He'd led this lesson hundreds of times, watched recruits panic, scream, cry, or freeze when the predator came close, but not this one. This human was rewriting the entire rhythm of the room without raising his voice, without firing a shot, without even trying. For the first time, the instructor wasn't teaching, he was witnessing. His eyes narrowed, the scar on his cheek tightening as he crossed his arms. But even his posture was no longer as solid as before. He could feel it too. The power had shifted. The predator lunged again, faster, its body a blur of claws and hunger. But the human didn't meet it with force. He stepped just enough, so minimal it looked effortless, like a dancer in a deadly waltz. And as the creature's claw swept through the space where he'd stood a second earlier, his hand moved. He didn't hit it. He didn't even touch it. He traced the air like someone who already knew every weak point in its body. First way, his voice cut through the growl like a sharp blade, low but carrying to every ear in the room. You break what it trusts most. He tapped his finger toward the beast's front legs, then its lower joints. This thing trusts its speed. It thinks speed is power. Take the speed, take the power. You don't fight what it's best at. You take it away. His tone wasn't boastful. It wasn't loud. It was terrifying because it was so calm, like he had already done this before, like he had said the same words over the bodies of creatures that didn't get back up. The predator swung its tail toward him in frustration, the simulated wind of it rushing through the room, but he slid around it with no more effort than a shadow moving with the light. The alien cadets watched with their jaws clenched, their claws digging into the edges of their seats, not because the predator scared them anymore, but because the human didn't seem to fear anything at all. He circled the creature with slow, controlled steps, never rushing, never blinking, like a hunter who was letting the prey make mistakes on its own. Second way, he said, his voice like ice sliding over stone. Go where it doesn't look. Every predator has blind spots. Some hide them well. Some don't. But they're always there. You find it. You don't let it breathe. His finger traced the space behind the creature's jawline, then the side of its neck, then down near its lower ribs, each motion sharp and clean like a surgeon marking cuts before the first incision. The holographic predator roared, spinning, but it couldn't find him. He was already gone from its line of attack before it even turned its head. One alien cadet whispered shakily, "He's not just fighting it. He's teaching it." Another murmured, "No, he's killing it slowly." The instructor clenched his jaw, trying to hold on to the lesson, but the truth was spilling into the air whether he wanted it or not. He had spent decades showing cadets how terrifying this predator was, how strong it was, how they had to fear it and train for years to barely survive it. But this man, this human, was showing them something else entirely. He wasn't teaching them to survive the predator. He was showing them how to destroy it. The predator lunged again, a savage, desperate movement, claws wide, jaws open, but it didn't matter. The human was already inside its space, moving low and close with a speed that didn't come from panic but from understanding. He stopped inches from the holographic creature's chest, looking up at it, face expressionless, eyes cold and steady, and whispered, "Third way. You make it bleed where it doesn't expect to bleed." His finger lifted slowly, pressing against the space between the creature's ribs, a place none of the cadets had ever thought to aim for, a soft cluster of simulated nerves that would, in real life, make the beast collapse. The creature froze mid-motion, as if sensing something different. It wasn't roaring anymore. It was breathing faster, its head twitching, unsure. That was the part that broke the alien cadets. Their terrifying predator, the thing they had feared since childhood stories, looked confused. Because in front of this single human, it wasn't a predator anymore. It was something waiting to be broken. The human stepped back slowly, never looking away from the beast. "You don't fight a predator with strength," he said, his voice flat, almost like he was bored. "You fight it with understanding. That's why it fears us." The room was dead quiet. No one moved. No one even dared breathe too loudly. The instructor stared at the human, his heart beating against his ribs like a drum. He had seen arrogance before, and he had crushed it. But this wasn't arrogance. This was knowledge. This was experience. This was something you couldn't train, something that was carved into a person by surviving things other people never walked away from. The holographic predator began to flicker, its simulation struggling to process how easily it had been cornered without even being touched. The human walked past it like it was already dead. The alien cadets shifted in their seats, their minds spinning, the entire foundation of what they'd believed about predators cracking apart. They hadn't just seen a human stand against a monster. They had seen a monster get humbled without a fight. And as the human walked past the instructor, brushing close enough for the old warrior to feel the quiet heat of him, the instructor realized something that chilled him to the core. This wasn't the story of a human learning to fight predators. This was the story of a predator that wore a human face. The predator didn't roar anymore, its massive holographic form pacing in slow, uneasy circles like it could sense something had shifted, like the invisible thread that had once made it the hunter had been cut. The alien cadets watched with wide, fixed eyes, the earlier smirks and careless arrogance now gone, their claws gripping the edges of their seats, not because the creature frightened them, but because the human standing a few meters away did. His face was still calm, breathing steady, posture unshaken. He didn't even look like he was in a fight. He looked like he was in control of it before it began. Every movement of the beast, every twitch of muscle, every shift of weight, he tracked like he already knew what would happen next. The predator, the same one that had terrified hundreds of cadets over the years, now looked unsure. The instructor's eyes narrowed. He had watched this lesson 1,000 times, and every single time the predator dominated the room, forced the recruits into panic. But now the predator itself seemed to feel pressure, like something bigger than it had entered the arena. The old warrior's chest rose slowly as he stared at the human. This was no ordinary soldier. This was something else entirely. The predator lunged again, but it was different this time. It wasn't confident. It was angry, reacting, trying to crush something it didn't understand. The human didn't back away. He stepped forward into the motion, pivoting smoothly around the creature's claw as if it moved in slow motion, his hand lifting, not striking, just pointing calmly to the underside of its jaw. "Predators are built to control," he said softly, the words slicing through the noise. "But control can be broken." The alien cadets leaned forward unconsciously. It was like watching someone pull apart a myth. The human's tone didn't rise. He didn't try to impress anyone. He just kept speaking with that steady, surgical voice. "If you want to cripple a predator, don't attack its strength. Attack its certainty. When it doubts, it slows. When it slows, it bleeds." The holographic creature roared in frustration, its massive body spinning as it tried to corner him. But every time it moved, the human was already somewhere else, sliding through the edges of its blind spots like he belonged there, like the darkness itself bent around him. His boots hit the floor softly, almost silently, and as he moved, the predator's growls began to change. Less like a king of the hunt, more like an animal realizing it was being hunted for the first time. One alien cadet whispered, barely audible, his making it afraid. Another answered in a low, trembling voice, "No, he already did." The instructor felt a chill crawl up his spine, something he hadn't felt in decades. His lesson was supposed to teach fear. But now, his lesson was being used to teach something else. The human wasn't reacting to the predator, he was unraveling it. The human stopped moving. For the first time, he stood still. The predator circled him, confused, uncertain. And then the human spoke again, his voice like quiet thunder. "Second way," he murmured, "kill its mind. You don't need to break its body if it's already broken inside." He stared at the creature, not shouting, not moving, and something in that stillness made every cadet's skin crawl. The predator roared louder, snapping at the air, but its steps faltered, its movements losing their clean, savage rhythm. The human's calm was louder than any weapon in the room. The instructor's jaw clenched. He had taught cadets how to fight predators with weapons, drills, precision. But this man was doing it with presence. With control. With something ancient and sharp in his voice. The predator charged one last time, desperate. But before it could reach him, the human pivoted, one smooth step to the side, raising his hand like a blade and bringing it down through the hologram's weak point between the neck and the chest. A movement so fast, so clean, it made several cadets gasp. The beast stumbled forward in the hologram's programmed reaction, collapsing to its knees. Its roar turned to a low, broken snarl. The room didn't breathe. The human didn't even look at it. He walked past its massive frame as if it wasn't worth his attention anymore. His voice stayed soft, but the weight in it hit the cadets like a blow. A predator is only terrifying if you let it be. For a long time, no one spoke. The predator lay still in its programmed defeat posture, its head bowed. The cadets, who had trained for years believing this beast was the embodiment of unstoppable power, were looking at something far more dangerous than any hologram. They were looking at a human who had just broken their monster without breaking a sweat. The instructor's fingers curled into fists behind his back. He couldn't even find the words to regain control. All the carefully built fear and tradition of this lesson had been erased in a matter of minutes. He looked at the human walking back toward his seat, boots silent on the floor, and for the first time, the old warrior understood why the galaxy feared humans. Not because they shouted the loudest or struck the hardest, but because they could look monsters in the eye and make the monsters doubt themselves. And as the human sat down, the predator behind him flickered out, leaving nothing but silence in its place. The alien cadets didn't whisper anymore. They didn't smirk. They only watched him like creatures that had just learned something dangerous, something that couldn't be unlearned. In that moment, the predator wasn't the scariest thing in the room. The human was. The room was dead silent now, not a single cadet moved. The predator was gone, but its absence felt heavier than its presence. Like the ghost of its roar still clung to the walls, but the fear had changed its owner. It no longer belonged to the beast. It belonged to the ones sitting in their metal chairs, staring at the human who had broken the creature without breaking a sweat. The same cadets who had arrived full of pride and alien arrogance now sat stiff, their claws gripping. Their knees, their breathing shallow, their thoughts spinning like loose wires in their heads. The predator wasn't supposed to lose. It was the symbol of terror, the thing the Academy used to remind them that they were never safe, never untouchable. And yet a single human had walked in and made it look weak. Not with power. Not with a weapon. Just with silence, precision, and something far older than their training, pure experience. The instructor stood near the control platform, hands locked behind his back. Eyes locked on the human like he was staring at something dangerous he didn't quite know how to contain. He'd spent a lifetime building this lesson to make recruits humble before the hunt. To remind them that no matter how trained they thought they were, predators would always be faster, stronger, more lethal. But this man had reversed the entire lesson without asking permission. The lesson wasn't about fear anymore. It was about control. It was about the hunter that hides inside silence. And that hunter wasn't the holographic creature. It was the human sitting quietly at the front now, like nothing had happened. The instructor cleared his throat, but even that sound felt weak. Cadets, he tried to speak, but his own voice betrayed him, a small shake at the edges, so he straightened his shoulders and forced strength back into it. You have just witnessed a rare display. But the cadets weren't listening to him anymore. Their eyes were still on the human, watching him like prey watches a predator through a cage, not trusting the bars to hold. The human finally turned his head slightly, not fast, just enough that his eyes met the instructor's. That small movement was like a weight dropping into still water. You said rare, he spoke quietly, his voice steady, sharp, but it's not rare where I come from. That sentence landed in the room like a gunshot, invisible but undeniable. One cadet flinched at the sound of it even though the human hadn't raised his voice. He didn't need to. The instructor's jaw tightened, his instincts screaming at him to reassert control, to remind everyone that he was the authority here. But there was something in the human's eyes that made that instinct die halfway through. It wasn't rebellion. It wasn't disrespect. It was worse. It was the quiet certainty of someone who had lived through worse than this room could ever offer. The human stood up slowly. No one moved when he did. No one dared. His boots echoed on the floor, that single rhythm somehow louder than the roars of the holographic predator had been. He walked to the center of the room again and turned his back to the cadets, staring at the floor where the beast had fallen moments ago, though nothing was left there now but faint burn lines and shadows. "You've been taught to fight predators," he said quietly, "to fear them, to train to survive them. But what none of you have been taught is how predators behave when they meet something that doesn't run." The alien cadets froze. The instructor's stomach twisted as the man continued, not with fire, not with shouting, but with the kind of calm that only came from someone who had seen war. Predators rule with certainty. They don't hunt because they're gods. They hunt because prey runs. When prey stops running, they start bleeding. He turned around slowly, facing the cadets. His eyes were cold but alive, carrying weight none of them could match. "And when they bleed," he said, his voice dropping lower, "they remember fear. Because everything that hunts can be hunted too." The words hit the room like a slow storm, creeping into every chest, wrapping around their throats, pressing down until they could barely breathe. This wasn't a lesson. This was something else entirely. The cadets had spent years learning to respect the predator. The human was teaching them to make it kneel. The instructor stepped forward finally, trying to pull the moment back to him. "Enough," he snapped, but even he heard how weak it sounded. "This lesson is not about." The human cut him off without raising his voice. "It should be." The old warrior froze in place. He wanted to be angry, but he wasn't. He was unsettled, and that was worse. The human walked slowly toward him, stopping only a few steps away. He didn't posture. He didn't raise his chin. But the air around him felt heavier, the kind of heaviness that soldiers carry after seeing what others can't imagine. "You use the predator to teach fear," he said, looking at the instructor's scarred face. "I use it to teach something else." "What?" one cadet whispered without meaning to. The human looked over his shoulder at them, and for a heartbeat the room felt like it was shrinking, like there was nothing left but his voice. "That fear belongs to no one," he said. "You can either live inside it, or make it live inside something else." For a long stretch of silence, no one moved. The instructor stared at him, his throat tight, memories of old battles crawling through his head like ghosts. This wasn't some loud recruit trying to prove himself. This was a man who had learned how to make predators fear. Finally, the human stepped away from the instructor and walked toward the back of the room, each step echoing in the silence like a heartbeat. He didn't look at the cadets again, but they looked at him like they'd just seen something sacred and dangerous at the same time. The instructor slowly turned to face the class, but for the first time in years, he had no control of it. The lesson was his no longer. It belonged to the human now. And worse than that, it belonged to the silence he had left behind. The predator might have vanished, but everyone in that room now understood something far darker. The monster wasn't the beast. It was the quiet man who didn't run. The silence inside the training hall had weight now. It pressed against the walls, against every throat, against every heartbeat. The kind of silence that didn't just fill a room but changed it, reshaped it, marked it. The predator was gone. The simulation was long over. Yet none of the alien cadets moved. None of them dared to even breathe too loudly. The lesson that was supposed to make them fear the creature had ended with them fearing the human instead. Though fear wasn't even the right word anymore, it was something sharper, heavier, like realizing for the first time that the thing you thought was the hunter wasn't. Every one of them had walked into this hall thinking they understood strength. Now, staring at that quiet man sitting in the last row, they weren't so sure they understood anything at all. The instructor had led this lesson for more than 30 years, drilled it into generations of warriors, made them respect the predator, made them know their limits. But now he stood frozen with his arms crossed tightly over his chest, staring at the human like the ground beneath him had shifted. The predator had been a tool, an unbeatable monster designed to teach humility. But it wasn't the predator that had taught the lesson today. It was the human. And it wasn't a lesson of fear. It was a lesson of power. Quiet power. The kind that doesn't need to roar to be felt. The cadets exchanged uneasy glances. Not one of them had laughed since the moment he'd spoken his first words. Some sat rigid in their chairs, their claws pressed against the metal armrests. Others lowered their heads, unwilling to meet the human's gaze, as if even looking too long would make their pulse race. A few tried to pretend they weren't shaken, but their tails twitched, their breathing betrayed them. They all knew it now. The galaxy's rumors about humans were not stories. They were warnings. The instructor finally stepped forward, the sound of his boots echoing on the cold floor. He forced his voice to be steady, but the tremor in it betrayed the truth. "Class dismissed," he said flatly. No long lecture. No final speech. He had nothing left to teach them after what they'd just seen. His lesson had been broken and rewritten in less than 20 minutes by someone who hadn't even raised his voice. The cadets rose from their chairs slowly, their movements unsure, like people waking up from a storm they hadn't expected. But before they could leave, the human stood up too. It wasn't sudden or loud, but the way the room reacted made it feel like the ground itself shook. Every eye turned toward him, even the instructor. He walked slowly toward the center of the room where the predator had fallen earlier, his boots dragging a single sound across the floor, the same steady rhythm that had followed him through the entire encounter. He stopped exactly where the creature had dropped to its knees. He didn't look at anyone, but everyone was watching him. "When I was a child," he began softly, his tone not loud but heavy enough to reach every ear, "they told me to fear the dark." He paused, the silence around him thickening. "But I learned something the first time a real predator came for me." He turned his head slowly toward the cadets, his expression calm, almost cold. "The dark fears what learns to stand inside it." The instructor felt a chill move through him at those words. The cadets froze again, not because the human shouted, but because he didn't have to. That sentence carved itself into their minds like a blade. The human continued, his voice steady like the beat of war drums buried under a calm night. "Predators win because their prey believes they can't be beaten. That's their power. Take that belief away, and they're just meat with claws." He walked closer to the line of cadets at the front, and as he passed them, none of them could meet his eyes. One cadet swallowed hard, his scaled hands trembling. "Today," the human said, stopping in the middle of the aisle, "you were supposed to learn fear. You did." His eyes narrowed slightly, the calm in his voice turning to something sharper. "But it wasn't the predator that taught it to you. It was me." That truth hit like a hammer. Some of the cadets shivered, their instincts reacting to something their minds hadn't caught up with yet. Others clenched their jaws and straightened, but even they couldn't hide the way their bodies betrayed them. The instructor himself had to take a slow, careful breath, because even though this was his hall, it no longer felt like his ground. The humans stopped in front of the instructor. They stood eye to eye now, silence wrapping around them like smoke. The instructor had seen thousands of recruits. Loud, brave, stupid, smart, terrified, but he had never met someone like this. The human's presence was louder than any roar. "You use the predator to make them fear," the human said softly, "but predators fear too. And someone needs to teach them that." The instructor didn't answer. He couldn't. The human took one step back, his eyes passing over the entire class. "Remember this," he said. "Every predator bleeds. Every predator breaks. And the moment it realizes that, the hunt ends." No one spoke. No one even shifted their weight. The human turned around and walked out of the training hall without looking back, his boots making that same quiet rhythm, the kind of sound that sticks in people's heads long after it's gone. The door hissed shut behind him, and for several seconds, no one moved. The predator was gone, the human was gone, but the fear they'd felt was still sitting in the room like a shadow. The instructor exhaled slowly, his voice low, rough. "Class dismissed," he repeated, but this time the words didn't sound like an order. They sounded like surrender. The cadets filed out silently, their eyes wide, their tails low, none of them speaking. They had all been trained to fight monsters, but tonight they'd learned something the galaxy rarely speaks of out loud. Monsters can bleed. And humans don't run from predators. They make predators run from them.